What does it feel like to watch 20 years of hope collapse in just 10 days? To see a nation built on sacrifice and promises fall back into the hands it once escaped? Sometimes, history doesn't whisper. It shouts, and in 2021, the world heard Afghanistan's cry loud and clear. The United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 marked the conclusion of its longest-running war, which had begun in 2001 in response to the September 11th terrorist attacks. The mission started with the goal of dismantling al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban regime that had provided sanctuary to terrorist leaders. Over time, the U.S. role expanded from counterterrorism to nation-building, including efforts to establish a democratic Afghan government, train Afghan security forces, and support human rights, especially for women and minorities. After nearly 2 decades of combat, over 2,400 American lives lost, trillions of dollars spent, and countless Afghan lives affected, the decision was made to end the military presence. The idea was not new. Both Presidents Obama and Trump had made moves toward withdrawal, but in April 2021, President Joe Biden announced a complete withdrawal by September of that year, later moved up to August 31. This decision followed a 2020 agreement between the U.S. and the Taliban signed in Doha, Qatar, which laid out a timeline for U.S. exit and called for intra-Afghan peace talks that ultimately failed to achieve lasting unity. Despite extensive support and years of training, the Afghan security forces struggled with internal corruption, poor leadership, and heavy dependence on U.S. air and logistical support. Once the withdrawal began, these weaknesses became more visible, leading to the rapid unraveling of Afghan defenses. What was meant to be a gradual transition turned into a swift and chaotic collapse of the Afghan government, underscoring the limits of foreign military intervention and the challenges of building lasting institutions in a war-torn society. The end of the war forced a national and global reckoning with the human, political, and moral costs of the 20-year U.S. presence in Afghanistan, as well as what, if anything, had truly been accomplished. The speed and scale of the Taliban's resurgence in 2021 shocked much of the world. After years of being pushed back into rural strongholds by international forces, the group began rapidly regaining territory as the United States and NATO allies initiated their final withdrawal. Despite 2 decades of U.S. military presence and billions of dollars invested in training and equipping the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, those forces collapsed with alarming speed. Many provinces fell to the Taliban without significant resistance, as local Afghan troops either surrendered or fled. Morale among government forces was low, and their reliance on U.S. support for air power, logistics, and intelligence left them vulnerable once that support was withdrawn. As early as May 2021, Taliban offensives began gaining momentum, capturing rural districts and eventually moving into key cities. The fall of provincial capitals, one after another, created a domino effect. Within weeks, the Taliban controlled the majority of Afghanistan. By mid-August, they reached Kabul, the capital, and took control with barely a fight. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled the country, citing a desire to avoid bloodshed. The Taliban entered the presidential palace and declared the war over. Their swift return to power raised questions about the effectiveness and sustainability of the U.S.-led efforts in Afghanistan. For many Afghans, the return of the Taliban brought back memories of repression, especially for women, journalists, and ethnic minorities. The international community expressed concern, but the speed of the takeover left little room for immediate diplomatic or humanitarian response. The Taliban's comeback also emboldened extremist groups elsewhere, while deeply unsettling America's global allies. The rapid collapse of the Afghan government highlighted the fragility of externally supported regimes and the deep-rooted local issues that military solutions alone had failed to resolve despite 2 decades of effort. As the Taliban advanced rapidly across Afghanistan in the summer of 2021, the Afghan government began to crumble from within. Despite years of international support and political backing, the government led by President Ashraf Ghani was plagued by corruption, infighting, and a lack of public trust. Provincial capitals were falling one after another, and the central government in Kabul appeared increasingly isolated and paralyzed. Many Afghan officials fled their posts or surrendered without resistance, while local leaders made independent deals with the Taliban to avoid violence. The Afghan military, heavily dependent on U.S. support, proved unable to operate independently once American troops and air support were withdrawn. Meanwhile, civilian fear and anxiety grew as reports of Taliban advances spread. As Taliban fighters approached Kabul, panic took hold of the city. On August 15, 2021, without any major confrontation, the Taliban entered the capital. President Ghani fled the country, reportedly with aids and cash, later surfacing in the United Arab Emirates. His sudden departure left a leadership vacuum and effectively signaled the end of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Inside Kabul, chaos ensued. Government buildings were abandoned, embassies began emergency evacuations, and civilians rushed to the airport, hoping for a way out. The Taliban quickly seized the presidential palace and declared their return to power. What shocked many observers was not just the Taliban's victory, but how swiftly the political structure of Afghanistan dissolved. There was no power-sharing agreement, no negotiation in the final moments, only a dramatic handover without resistance. The images of deserted government offices and the lowering of the Afghan flag at international institutions became symbols of the collapse. The entire process unfolded over a matter of days, marking a dramatic and definitive end to 2 decades of U.S.-backed governance in Afghanistan. As the Taliban took control of Kabul on August 15, 2021, thousands of Afghans rushed to Hamid Karzai International Airport in a desperate attempt to flee the country. The scene at the airport quickly descended into chaos as civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, crowded runways, clung to fences and pleaded with foreign troops for evacuation. The U.S. and allied forces were still conducting military operations at the airport, attempting to organize a massive airlift for diplomats, citizens, and vulnerable Afghans who had supported international missions. The urgency was overwhelming. Many had worked as interpreters, journalists, aid workers, or members of civil society, and now feared Taliban retaliation. Panic gripped the crowds as planes prepared to take off. In heartbreaking scenes, people clung to the sides of military aircraft, with some falling to their deaths after takeoff. Gunfire, stampedes, and the sheer crush of people made the situation even more perilous. Despite the tense conditions, U.S. and NATO forces managed to coordinate one of the largest air evacuations in history, eventually flying out over 120,000 people by the end of August. Still, thousands were left behind. The airport itself became a symbol of both hope and despair. Inside its walls, people found a path to safety. Outside, fear and helplessness grew. Amid this, a suicide bombing carried out by ISIS-K on August 26 killed over 170 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members, adding to the trauma and further complicating the evacuation. The images and footage from those days were broadcast across the world, sparking a mix of sorrow, outrage, and reflection. What was meant to be a carefully managed exit turned into one of the most dramatic and tragic chapters in recent history, highlighting the human cost of war and the consequences of sudden withdrawal in a fragile nation. The return of the Taliban in 2021 brought deep fear and uncertainty for millions of Afghan citizens, especially women, children, ethnic minorities, and those who had embraced freedoms gained during the previous 2 decades. Under the Taliban's previous rule in the 1990s, women were barred from education, employment, and even leaving their homes without a male guardian. Many Afghans feared a return to those harsh restrictions. Almost immediately after their takeover, reports emerged of girls being turned away from schools, female journalists being silenced, and women being told to stay home from work. Though the Taliban promised a more moderate approach, their actions reflected a return to strict interpretations of Islamic law, raising alarms among human rights organizations around the world. For women who had become doctors, teachers, lawyers, and politicians, the reversal was not just professional, but deeply personal, erasing years of progress and hard-earned freedom. Ethnic and religious minorities, especially the Hazara community, also faced increased persecution. The Hazara, a Shia Muslim group historically targeted by the Taliban, experienced killings, land seizures, and forced displacements. Civil society leaders, activists, and former government workers went into hiding or fled the country, fearing retaliation. Those associated with Western organizations faced particular danger, with some being detained or disappearing. Meanwhile, the media faced heavy restrictions and freedom of expression became increasingly dangerous. Social spaces that had once celebrated art, music, and public discourse became quiet or shuttered. The dreams of a generation that had grown up in a more open Afghanistan seemed to vanish almost overnight. The psychological toll was immense. Families were separated. Young people feared for their futures, and many began searching for any opportunity to escape. For countless Afghans, the Taliban's return marked not just a political change, but a profound personal loss of dignity, safety, and hope. The U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban's rapid takeover of Afghanistan in 2021 triggered a wave of global reaction, sparking intense debate about American foreign policy, the ethics of intervention, and the long-term consequences of military engagement. For many critics, the chaotic end to the two-decade war symbolized a failure of strategy and planning, highlighting how fragile the Afghan government truly was despite years of support. Allies around the world questioned the reliability of U.S. commitments, while adversaries saw the withdrawal as a moment of American vulnerability. The scenes from Kabul airport became emblematic of lost control and diplomatic embarrassment, raising concerns about how similar missions might be handled in the future. Within the United States, the decision to leave was divisive. Some praised it as a necessary end to a costly and unwinnable conflict, while others condemned the lack of preparation and the humanitarian consequences that followed. Veterans and families who had served or lost loved ones in Afghanistan struggled to reconcile their sacrifices with the war's outcome. Many Afghans who had worked alongside coalition forces felt abandoned, left behind in a country now under Taliban control. Humanitarian organizations warned of impending crises, from hunger to repression, as foreign aid was suspended and diplomatic ties were severed. Globally, policymakers and analysts began reassessing the broader implications of military intervention as a tool for nation-building. The war had cost trillions of dollars and countless lives, yet the rapid collapse of Afghanistan's institutions challenged assumptions about what could be achieved through force. The situation became a turning point, not just for U.S. foreign policy but for global understanding of conflict resolution, humanitarian responsibility, and the need for long-term, inclusive political solutions. It was a sobering reminder that wars do not always end with victory or peace, but often with unanswered questions and lasting scars. The story of the U.S. withdrawal and the Taliban's return in 2021 is one filled with pain, sacrifice, and difficult truths. It reminds us that even the most powerful efforts can fall short when trust, unity, and long-term understanding are missing. For 20 years, soldiers served, lives were lost, progress was made, and hopes were raised. But in mere weeks, everything changed. The people of Afghanistan, especially its women, youth, and vulnerable communities, were left to face a future filled with uncertainty. Around the world, leaders and citizens alike were forced to reflect on the meaning of responsibility, the cost of war, and the importance of compassion in moments of crisis. Though the war ended, its impact lives on in every Afghan heart, in every soldier's memory, and in every lesson the world must now carry forward.